Great. So now I've shared with you a couple of ways that I like to protect my energy when I go into a work day. And Natalie, I would love to chat with you about your perspectives on this. What do you experience as someone who senses energy? And what are some of the ways that you protect or release your energy at work or after work?
I love this conversation. I think that it's so powerful because anyone who's ever been in a highly stressful workplace, a toxic workplace, knows that unconsciously we humans can have the tendency of like unconsciously armoring up, right? Like where you put on your armor and you're going into that meeting, or you're going into that person's office, or you're going into the office itself, and you put on your armor for the day. And it's this unconscious way of trying to protect ourselves, but it oftentimes then shields like the best part of ourselves. And so I love the way that you talk about it, which is like a super intentional way of protecting your own energy so that you don't take on that stuff. But by doing so, it lets the best part of yourself still come through. So I love that. I think some of my favorite ways I am highly empathic. And so I had to learn a lot of these tools the hard way. And so I think for me, like a lot of the ways in which I shake it off now as an entrepreneur, it's different. If you're sitting in an office, it's one thing. For me, like I will try to get outside and go for a walk. I love my rebounder, my mini trampoline. Like I will jump on that thing even for a few minutes in between calls, and just to kind of like shake it off. I think that yoga is a fantastic way. It kind of combines meditation. Anything where you can sweat is a really good way to just kind of like push it out. Yeah, those are some ideas around how I release it. And then protection wise, I love the idea, even if it's like a super quick, like before you're walking in, if it's just like,
Mm-hmm.
like it can be really fast where that person's training, the conversation is going to go sideways. And like, I mean, I've done it before where I almost just in a split second where on a conversation I was having the other day, I closed my eyes and I just kind of like protected myself from it and realized that they needed to process whatever they were saying and I didn't have to take that on.
No, that's so, so important. And I wish I had mentioned that earlier, is that, while starting your day and ending your day with some energy protection and release is really important, definitely doing it before you're about to encounter a situation that you think may be, potentially negative. It's so valuable. And you're right. It just takes a couple of seconds. Whether you just pause and take a deep breath, or you have that quick visualization, or it's an affirmation like, meeting is going to go just fine. I'm not going to absorb any of this person's energy. It's so important. And I think that what's challenging is that a lot of people don't recognize that how important our energy is in how we experience the day, right? There's this belief that, especially because so many of us get into this routine of, alarm goes off, you get ready, get your coffee, go to work, you sit there for 9, 10, 11 hours a day, you come home, you make dinner, you hopefully spend some time with your family, and then it's sleep and repeat. And there's so many things that can affect how we experience the day, and managing or even being aware of our energy is something that a lot of us don't tend to do. So I think if you're an empath, you're probably used to recognizing that a little bit more. If you recognize that you're an empath, because I think a lot of empaths don't even realize that's what's happening. And for me, my experience was I was going to work and doing those long days, long weeks, and, oftentimes going to happy hours and extending my workday beyond just the office and, spending time with coworkers and doing team buildings. And I would get home and I had zero interest in talking to anybody else. So
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, like my husband, my friends, my family, they suffer as a result, because by the time I get home and they want to chat and they want to catch up, I don't have any energy left to give. I have
Yeah.
been drained completely. And that is so unfair to them. So
Yeah.
when I realized that this was happening, I realized I needed to manage my energy better. And this is when I started putting these measures in place. And it made a huge difference. And I was much more careful about noticing my energy and realizing, oh, I need to let some of this go before I go home, because if we're not aware of it, it starts to affect other parts of our lives, not just how we show up at work, right?
100%. Yeah. For me, I think whether it's in a coaching scenario, which is my work, or even in personal relationships, I think I want, oftentimes the driver for me is like, I want people to feel really good. And so I can like get to that level with them. If they're on the floor crying, like I can get there with them. Like I have done that before. And then it's like, but what does that do for my ability to help them? And I think that I almost unintentionally, before I started doing this work, thought that I needed to transmute their energy and leave them feeling good. But then it was like, at what cost? You know? And I think that instead, learning that I can be a better friend, partner, coach, if I'm not on that same level as them, that way I can help further support and pull them up. And so I've had to do a lot of work on myself to understand what the difference is between fully supporting and being so empathetic and empathic that I'm like there with them, you know?
And I think that's a really important distinction to make. It's that we're not saying protect your energy so that you're not empathetic. Leaders absolutely need to feel empathy to be, effective leaders. But there's a difference between stepping in and understanding the pain or frustration or, anger, whatever that somebody else is feeling, and then taking that energy as your own, right? So I think what energy protection helps us do is it doesn't cut off our feeling sense. We still feel that, but we don't take that energy inside of our bodies and hold it there, which I think a lot of empaths tend to do unknowingly. Is, when they're around a negative person or a negative situation, they feel it deeply, which is part of one of their superpowers, right? That they can feel so deeply, but they absorb that feeling and they carry it home with them. And then they don't know why they're feeling down or why the next day they're still feeling it. It's that there's a difference between being able to empathize and understand the feeling that someone's experiencing and actually absorbing that energy of the feeling into their own bodies. And so I think that's where the distinction needs to be made. Is we're not saying don't empathize. We're saying you must empathize, but you don't want to take that energy into your own body, into your own space. And that's why I think as leaders, it's so important to have these tools available so that you're not inadvertently putting up a big wall before you go into a difficult situation or have a sensitive conversation with an employee, that you can still find ways to approach them with empathy, but then not take all of the energy of that conversation home with you.
100%. Oh, it's so important. It's so important. I love what you said about that leaders need to be empathetic. Like if you think back to, close your eyes for a sec and think about the best leader you've ever had. Can you picture them?
I'm going through my visual Rolodex right now, like just trying to, and that's an important point, because I think there are so many leaders that I think as individuals are very empathetic, but you can feel them kind of tone that down or turn it off at work, which is such a disappointment, right? And I've had the great pleasure of working with a lot of senior executives who one-on-one, that those are deeply feeling individuals. Then you see them in a meeting and you're like, whoa, where did that empathy go?
Yeah, the
And
robot
it's
comes out.
right, the robot
Yeah.
comes out, because I think there's this expectation that we have to show up as very dispassionate or very rational leading, less emotional, like
Especially
somewhere,
as women executives.
especially as women, right? And I think that's why we've created this modern CEO podcast, is that this old idea of that masculine energies, and when I say masculine energies, I don't mean things that men do. I mean energies that would be from a spiritual or esoteric perspective considered more masculine. So like linear thinking, rationalizing everything, um, you know, very data and metrics driven, versus more feminine energies, which would be considered more, nurturing, compassionate, empathetic, intuitive, right? That we as leaders need to have a strong balance of both, right? Men should not be all on the masculine front. They need some of those feminine qualities as well. And women should not be completely in their feminine. They need to have some of those masculine as well. And so maintaining that balance is the challenge. And I think that somewhere along the line, well, for most of history, right, leadership meant being leaning very heavily into your masculine, which meant turning off in a lot of cases your emotional center and not connecting with people on that level. And there's the extreme of that, being highly emotional, not thinking about, what the market is telling you, what data is telling you, not thinking about timelines and plans, like too far on the,
Repercussions. Yeah.
right, too far on the extreme on the feminine energy side. That's not going to work in business either. And so what I'm happy to be seeing is that more and more people are embracing both sides. Men are developing greater ability to express the empathy they already have. So we're not saying men are becoming more empathetic. They already were in many cases. Now there's this permission almost to be able to express that, to be more nurturing in their communications, to be more compassionate leaders. And women, I think, are also seeing that it's safe for them to express those sides of themselves as well. And that's so important, right? As we move into the next several decades of business and how that evolves, we're no longer going to put up with people who don't have that level of empathy and connection with their teams, with their companies. And I think you're starting to see that more and more, that tolerance level is going down for people that don't have any of that indexing on the feminine side.
100%. And yeah, I love that, it's no matter your gender, right? These are just masculine and feminine energies that can be expressed in any gender, but that balance is important for both, creating relationships as well as establishing confidence in your ability to execute, right? Like you said, if you're over indexing too much on either one, it's no longer attractive. And thank goodness. I think that mindful modern leaders and modern businesses are incredibly turned off by people who are so far on one of those scales, over indexing in either one of those. I think that, especially like I heard growing up in business, especially as a Latina, as a female, like, you do not cry at work. You do not get emotional. I was called overly emotional in situations that made me want to be like, oh no, honey, you haven't seen emotional yet. If you think that's emotional, call my husband, but it's like, and so it can train you to really go so far in the other direction that then you lose your impact, you lose your effectiveness as a leader, because that little exercise with the eyes closed, like the leaders that I remember that I worked for that really left a positive impact on me were the ones that were able to connect on that human level, and who were empathetic, and who understood what was going on in my life, who made it psychologically safe for me to share things that were going on in my personal life, who allowed me to bring my whole self to work, and that was okay. And they weren't going to use that information against me, because they were some crazy psycho corporate robot. There were some of those too. Right. That's another podcast episode.
Yeah, but definitely. And I think that being able to understand how your energy is affected by your work, by the people you work with, is so important, because I think that if you are an empathetic person or an empath and you don't recognize that this is happening, I think that's a big reason why certain leaders shut down, why they don't feel safe to open themselves up, is because there's this fear that you're going to absorb all this energy and it's too much to handle. If you are a highly empathic person, taking on the energy of a team, of an individual, or of an organization that's in turmoil, it's too much. And so what happens is, I've seen this a lot, is the walls go up to protect themselves, but there's not
Yeah.
that awareness that they're protecting themselves. And so they come across as this very stiff, unemotional, non-connecting individual when they really are. So I feel like if we can teach leaders how to protect their personal energy, that allows the barriers to come down, that allows the empathy to be safely expressed without a fear of taking on the negative energy of the space or the team or the group that's happening in the moment. And that's why I encourage all leaders, even if you think that you're just slightly, you're slightly on the scale of the empath or highly sensitive person, start trying these protection practices both before your workday and at the end of the workday, and see how it affects your ability to both open up and connect with your team members and just feel more comfortable each day in being your true self, instead of this version of yourself that you think you need to be a successful leader.
I love that. And I think there's also something else I've seen is like the leader who they want to be empathetic. They come into their interactions with their team truly wanting to hold space, but then it is so much on top of everything else that they're dealing with that they simply can't hold all of that. And so they don't have the opportunities throughout their day to not only get all of that stuff out, but then replenish themselves and fill their cup back up with energy that they're going to need in order to hold for them. So I think that it's almost, like the 5 love languages, right? Where it's like you have your love bucket and you empty it, but then you have to do things to fill it back up. If there's an energetic gas tank and these conversations are using that energy, the physical exercise, the meditation, the funny conversation, the you know trampoline, the rebounder, whatever it is, it's almost like that like cleans out the gas tank. And then you do have to do some stuff to fill yourself back up before you're going to be able to hold space. And I think that I have seen a lot of really well-intended leaders not understand that energy dynamic and have the best intentions, but there's only so much that a person can hold.
Absolutely. And I think you make a great point, which we'll end on. And that is, you don't just do this once, right? This is a daily practice of maintaining, releasing, cleansing, restoring your energy that needs to happen in order to have a really healthy, vibrant, wonderful work life. And that managing your energy in this way can make the difference between really suffering every day through a stressful job and embracing the challenge that work presents, and approaching your relationships at work in a really positive and meaningful way. So we encourage you to try these exercises out. Reach out to us if you have any questions or would like some more suggestions. And we hope you'll join us for our next episode in a week from now.
Thanks a lot. Cheers.
Bye.